The nation of Assyria grew to be the destructive force used by God to tear down the northern kingdom of Israel. Rising from the common history of times of strength and weaknesses, a usurper to the throne of Assyria managed to restart a legacy of ruthlessness and strength in battle. The usurper's name was Pul. But when making his move for the throne, he changed it to a royal name, Tiglath-Pileser III. Tiglath-Pileser first secured his own land, Assyria, and then he subdued and befriended the southern kingdom of Babylon. With this new security and support, Tiglath-Pileser pushed the boundaries of Assyria. He is paid off by King Menahem of Israel and King Ahaz of Judah, but he eventually takes much of their land also. The next king of Assyria, Shalmaneser V, does not live up to his father's fame. His most notable dealings are a 5-year besieging of Tyre and his famous siege of Samaria because of the rebellion of King Hoshea, recorded in 2 Kings 17. It appears as if Shalmaneser V does not get a chance to complete his sieges. He dies suddenly, probably murdered by his successor and younger brother, Sargon II. Sargon II not only regains the respect of his people, but he finishes the sieges of Shalmaneser and destroys Samaria, deporting the residents of northern Israel. Sargon II survives in history as the king that extended the reach of Assyria in all directions, from the island of Cyprus to Ethiopia, from Babylon to the northern mountains. Sargon dominated and killed many, but even he could not escape death. He left his kingdom to a vengeful son, King Sennacherib.
In the year 701 BCE, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, led a vast army against the kingdom of Judea. King Hezekiah, who had rebelled against the Assyrian Empire, now confronted the world's greatest war machine. The Assyrian army was powerful and extremely well organized. It was composed of a hierarchy of officers, professional soldiers, and specialized forces, cavalry, archers, infantry, and engineering corps. Upon its arrival, 46 fortified cities fell one after the other. The revolt's suppression reached its climax with the conquest of Lachish, the second most important city in the Judean kingdom. In his prophecies, the prophet Isaiah warns, "Now therefore behold, the Lord brings upon them the waters of the river, strong and many, the king of Assyria in all his glory, and it will rise over all its channels and go over all its banks. And it shall pass through Judah, it shall overflow and go over, it shall reach even to the neck." Sennacherib boasts of his successes in war, and especially of the conquest of Lachish. He orders the carving of a 12-meter-long relief depicting the city's conquest. The relief panels were displayed in Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh and were only uncovered 2,700 years later. They are currently exhibited at the British Museum in London. The relief accurately portrays the operation of the Assyrian war machine, from the Battle of Lachish to the parade of war captives in front of Sennacherib's throne. Depicted in the panels are huge siege machines that enable the army to break into the besieged city, as well as sophisticated battering rams, deadly stone slings, skilled archers, and more. They also depict psychological war tactics employed by the Assyrians to dishearten the Jewish warriors, such as displaying captives impaled on wooden spikes, skinning of live prisoners, and other horrific forms of torture. Despite all of these, the residents of Lachish fight valiantly. They are shown throwing flaming torches, chariot wheels, and anything they could lay their hands on at the heads of the Assyrian soldiers. Their efforts are to no avail, and the residents of Lachish that survived, mainly women and children, and all the spoils of war that were plundered, were exiled and forced to march humiliated before King Sennacherib as he sat reviewing them on his throne. In the relief above Sennacherib's head, there is an Akkadian inscription explicitly referring to the conquered city of Lachish. Sennacherib, king of the universe, king of Assyria, sits on a throne, and the spoils of Lachish are paraded before him. Now that Lachish has fallen, the Assyrian army marches onward to Hezekiah's city, Jerusalem, capital of Judea. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was coming and that he was determined to fight against Jerusalem, he took counsel with his princes and his mighty men to stop the waters of the springs which were outside the city, and they did help him. So there gathered a large group of people together, and they stopped up all the springs in the brook that ran through the midst of the land, saying, "Why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water?"
We are now at the Gihon Spring. It contains an enormous amount of water.
Prior to Hezekiah's rule, all this water flowed outside the city through irrigation channels to the fields of the people and to the king's gardens.
When he prepared Jerusalem for the Assyrian siege, Hezekiah worried that the mighty army of Assyria would camp outside the city walls, gaining access to the city's water source.
He decided to prevent their use of the water by blocking and sealing the springs outside the city, including the Gihon Spring. He diverted the spring's water into an underground tunnel, which had been quarried into the heart of the mountain. Two groups of masons worked towards each other from both sides and met in the middle of the tunnel. And the water flowed from the source to the pool. The tunnel ends at the pool of Siloam, which was inside the city, behind protective walls. The account of this engineering wonder is mentioned explicitly in the Bible and is also documented in the Shiloach inscription, which was discovered 6 meters from the end of the tunnel.
This is a copy of the inscription written in ancient Hebrew letters. It describes the dramatic moment when the two groups met inside the tunnel.
The masons were swinging their axes one towards the other, and they heard the voice of one man calling his fellow. And on the day of the tunneling, the masons bore through, one man towards his fellow, axe upon axe, and the water flowed from the source to the pool for 1,200 cubits. One of the most fascinating war campaigns in the ancient world took place in the year 701 BCE, when Sennacherib, king of Assyria, set out with a mighty army in an attempt to conquer Hezekiah, king of Judea, and his capital, Jerusalem.
For thousands of years, we knew about this campaign only in the pages of the Bible, until 1830, when a surprising discovery was made in northern Iraq.
In Sennacherib's palace in the city of Nineveh, archaeologists found a hexagonal prism made of baked clay with an inscription in Akkadian. In the inscription, Sennacherib, the great conqueror, commemorates his military campaigns, including his expedition to the land of Judea and Jerusalem. Sennacherib boastfully presents himself in the opening sentences. "I am Sennacherib, the great king, the mighty king, king of the world."
He continues by bragging about his sophisticated conquest of the fortified cities of Judea.
As for Hezekiah the Judahite, who did not submit to my yoke, 46 of his strong walled cities, as well as the small towns in their area, which were without number, by leveling with battering rams and by bringing up siege engines. The Book of Kings recounts very much the same reality. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them.
It is fascinating that even the heavy taxes imposed by Sennacherib upon Hezekiah are described in an almost identical manner, both in the prism and in the Bible.
He, Hezekiah, overwhelmed by my majestic awe, he sent me to Nineveh, my capital, 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold.
Despite the heavy taxes that he had imposed, Sennacherib was determined to conquer Jerusalem. However, the end of the story and the fate of the city as described in the prism is very peculiar. Rather than boast of his conquest of Jerusalem, Sennacherib settles for a brief description of the caged King Hezekiah.
As for Hezekiah the Judahite, like a caged bird, I shut him up in Jerusalem, his royal city. I threw up earthworks against him, and one coming out of the city gate, I turned back to his misery. Many scholars believe that this meager account serves as convincing proof that Sennacherib did not succeed in his design to conquer Jerusalem. The Assyrian army had to withdraw after failing to subdue its enemy.
A more precise account of the battle's end and of what took place behind the walls of Jerusalem is brought forth in the prophecy of Isaiah.
Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into the city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shields, nor cast a bank against it. By the way he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into the city, says the Lord.